Sorry to hear the word about Vic Lund's passing. Denny sent me a text of Dr. Cavanis and Vic together. I don't know, when was that photo taken, Dennis? And how long had they known each other, Meryl's dad and Vic? A piece of time. Yeah, well, there's a text in the scripture that says, even so come, Lord Jesus. And we just say, heaven can't come soon enough, so our condolences to the Lund family. I want to share with you that there was a young preacher that preached a sermon he thought was pretty good. And he covered everything. He covered lust and gluttony and pride and anger. And he was really feeling good about himself after the sermon. He went out and he was at the door and he was shaking hands. And one of the members came out and he was taken aback when the member said, "Hey, don't curse the darkness, turn on the light." Good words. Don't curse the darkness, turn on the light. There's a lot of darkness in the world today. I work at ICC, and so I hear International Children's Care, so I hear stories of darkness fairly often. And they start out dark, but then obviously the little kids come to our children's villages and it becomes really a good story. But I want to share one story with you at the beginning of my sermon, and it's about Peter and Peter's dad. This is over in India. And Peter's dad worshiped the devil. And he worshiped evil spirits. He prayed to evil spirits. And people would come to him, and he would actually heal or try to heal people. And one day, and this was a recent story, one day an evangelist came to their village, and Peter's dad, the witch doctor, prayed, and he said, chase that evangelist away. Prayed to the evil spirits, chase that evangelist away, and destroy that evangelist. And when it didn't happen, Peter's dad, his father, went to the meetings, listened, heard the story of Jesus, accepted Jesus, and was baptized. And we say, well, that's a great story. But it has a sad ending in that the next year, the crops failed in the little village. And the elders came to the house, to Peter's dad's house, and beat up Peter's dad, and his father died. And a lot of sadness, a lot of darkness in this world today. I want to share with you that I was a little kid in Southern California, and I had a great neighborhood. Our neighbors were great. We had lots of games, lots of activities, all kinds of things going on. And one time, one of the neighbors came, they got all the parents together and says, hey, we want to take our kids out. We want to explore Calico. Calico was a ghost town out in the desert out by Barstow. We want to explore the mines in Calico, silver mines. And I don't know what was wrong with my parents, but they said, yeah, you can go. And so we all went out there, all these kids from the neighborhood, and it was just amazing. This was like years ago, and there were mine carts, and there were boxes that there was no dynamite in them, but they said dynamite. And like, this is just kids' fairy tale land. This is just wonderful. And we went into these mines, and there's all kinds of mine shafts going this way and that way, and ladders and various different levels. And we explore for several hours, and then they blow a whistle, and they say, it's time for lunch. And I'm like 2 levels down in this mine, and I call out, hey, I'm still exploring. I'll be there in a second. And so I'm in this little shaft, and there's about 2 inches on one side and 2 inches on the other side. And do any of you have claustrophobia? There's about 6 inches above me, and I'm crawling through the shaft, and I just want to see around the corner. And I got one hand in front of me, one hand behind me, and I realize I'm stuck. Any of you get claustrophobia? I can see some of you get claustrophobia. So I'm like this, and that's the moment my flashlight goes out. I can still remember that feeling. Have you heard the word visceral? It's like a physical feeling. I had that visceral reaction to this. I can still feel it today, that claustrophobia. There's a lot of darkness in this world today, and literal darkness can be terrifying. So can figurative darkness. And that brings me to the story of Norval Young. Norval Young, there he is. In 1975, Charmin and I, that's Charmin, we lived in Newbury Park, and Norval Young lived about 25 miles from us. We lived in Newbury Park, California, by Thousand Oaks. He lived in a place called Malibu, and he was the chancellor of Pepperdine University. And Pepperdine University, he had been the chancellor, he'd been the president, now he was the chancellor. He'd moved that campus. He had been the only leader of Pepperdine University. It had been a campus of 900 down in LA. He moved it out to the hillsides above Malibu, and he was on top of the world. And what was happening in his life, and he was a pastor and educator and writer and author and went all over the world speaking, and he was a great leader. And what was happening on September 12, 1975, a long time ago, he was on top of the world, but then on September 13, something horrible happened. On this campus, there was a young faculty member was riding a motorcycle on the campus, and he struck some sort of a telephone pole or something, a light pole, and he was killed. And so Norval Young, the chancellor of Pepperdine University, his world turned upside down. One moment, everything was going great. He'd built this great, big, huge athletic field house. He raised millions of dollars, and Gerald Ford was going to come out and dedicate it in just a couple days. And then this faculty member got in an accident, and he died. And Norval Young was heartbroken. He went to the hospital. He was a pastor at heart. He went to the hospital, stayed with the family, was part of the whole decision process, turned off the heroic measures, the end of life, and all of that. And then that evening, he came back to the campus, called all the students together. They met in this great athletic field house, and then he shared, well, this is how people do with an accident. This is how the accident happened, and this is what happened when we had to cease our attempts to save his life. And he was heartbroken, devastated, and he just broke down, and he cried. This is the chancellor of the university. He was just heartbroken. He went back to his house, and he had so much pain, he decided to take one drink. You know where this story is going. Is one drink, 2 drinks, 3 drinks. He's just blasted himself. The next morning, quick story, he gets up, he decides that he's going to drive down to Santa Monica, which isn't far away. He gets on the Pacific Coast Highway, and he's driving down there. The light turns red. He doesn't see it. He blacks out. He runs into a car right in front of him. The trailer hitch in the car goes into the gas tank. The car in front of him catches fire. His car catches fire, and the next thing he knows, he's in the hospital, and he's waking up. And the reality is coming into his mind. There were 2 people killed in this car accident. 2 women that were in a car in front of him. He ran into them, and he is responsible for killing these 2 women. And then he realizes that there's thousands of people that have faith in him. He's destroyed their lives to some extent, and he's destroyed his own life. And darkness, that's that figurative darkness, descends on him. And I want to ask you the question, have you ever had figurative darkness in your life? And that's a rhetorical question, isn't it? It's a rhetorical question, because all of us have had that figurative darkness. And you think about all of our lives, our families, our kids, our spouses, our jobs, our health, everything. And then, and I'm speaking for myself, there's times I've made dumb, stupid decisions. Did Norval make a dumb, stupid decision? Absolutely. There's times I have made dumb, stupid decisions, and that darkness has descended upon me. And probably you're saying, yeah, it's descended on all of us. All of us can say, yes, we can look back, and you probably don't want to look back, but you can look back and you can say, yeah, there's been times. So in that darkness, what's the message of Jesus? Now this is the takeaway. The takeaway, Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of God. In the darkness that envelops us, in the darkness that envelops the world, and the darkness that enveloped Norval Young, there's only one answer. And it's Matthew 6, and it's so simple. Matthew 6:33, seek ye first the kingdom of God. Jesus, for background, Jesus has already stood up, and he'd gone to Nazareth, his little synagogue, and he read out of Isaiah. He said, I'm going to preach the good news to the poor, proclaim freedom to the imprisoned. I'm going to release the oppressed, and I'm going to give light to the blind. There's two key words this morning. One is light, and the other is kingdom. Over and over again. Light and kingdom. So this was the background. All of this had happened. Jesus had already had that, this is what I'm going to do in his local synagogue. He'd already been baptized. He'd already had the time in the wilderness of temptation. He'd already called his disciples, already began healing the sick. And then he gives to his disciples a prayer. And the prayer is, Our Father, which art in heaven. And it goes on, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And there's that word, kingdom. A very simple word, but it's used over and over again. 42 times in Matthew, 17 times in Mark, 29 times in Luke. Kingdom. And the basic, this is not rocket science. Jesus says the kingdom is in two stages. There's two stages of the kingdom. There's one that is right here and right now, and there's one that's coming in the future. And that's when we say, Lord Jesus, come. That's the future kingdom. But throughout the Gospels, and I'm zeroing in on the Gospels, throughout the Gospels, Jesus says the kingdom is here. Now you have it. He says, it's in your midst, it's at hand, you've already entered it. He keeps saying, the kingdom, it's here. It's not something in the future. It is actually here. It's not far from you. It's come upon you. It is nigh unto you. The kingdom is here. So, this is, what's the date? October 9, 2021. The kingdom is here. Do you believe that? Right now, Jesus said the kingdom is here. It's not in the future. Well, it's two stages, one here and one later, but the kingdom is here right now. And the question is how do we live our lives if the kingdom is here? And the simple answer is live our lives as Jesus lived his. We can all go home, right? Live our lives as Jesus lived his, and he lived his life in compassion. And a few weeks ago, we talked about the word spagnitza. It's hard to say, spagnitzathai. It's a Greek word that means compassion. Jesus was all compassion, and it occurs over and over again in the New Testament. And there's four. If you keep notes, there's four texts I want to mention, four experiences, incidents, where Jesus uses the word, where the gospel writers describe what Jesus was doing as compassion. Mark 1:41, a man with leprosy. He begs Jesus, heal me, heal me. This is Mark 1:41, heal me, heal me. And this quote, Jesus looked on him not with annoyance or anger or judgment, but he saw his hopelessness, saw his lostness, sensed his darkness. He talked to him, reached out and touched him. And the man was healed. That's Mark 1:41. Matthew 9:36, Jesus saw crowds. And he looked out, and he was with his disciples. He saw these crowds, and he said they're tired and hungry and harassed. And he's talking to his disciples, and he says they're like sheep without a shepherd. And then another quote, they're like sheep without a shepherd. Somehow he was able to walk in their shoes, feel what they were feeling, see where they were coming from. He sensed their darkness, and his heart went out to them. Compassion. Luke 7, verse 11. Jesus and the disciples come to a little village of Nain. And as they're going in the village, the crowd's coming out. It's a funeral. There's a widow who has only one boy. That boy has died. They're having his funeral, and Jesus comes up to this funeral procession. And here's another quote. Somehow he was able to walk in their shoes, Somehow he was able, as he heard her crying out in pain, he was moved with sorrow, and his heart went out to her. He connected, he felt her pain, and with a voice filled with emotion and tears, he said to her simply, "What? Don't cry." Jesus' words to this widow. And the story ends very abruptly. Jesus touched the coffin. You know, Jesus was tactile. He touched the beggars, and he touched the coffin, and the young man was raised, and it ends, this is interesting, we don't know exactly all the details, but it ends, says the young man, Jesus gave the young man back to his mother. Powerful compassion. Last one, Matthew 20, verse 29. Two blind men, they're on the roadside, and Jesus is walking by, and they're shouting at him, and they're shouting, "Have mercy on us, have mercy on us." And the crowd, not nice people that were walking with Jesus, this crowd says, in effect, "Be quiet, don't bother us, shut up." They're saying to these blind men, these men can't see, and they're saying, "Have mercy on us." And the crowd with Jesus saying, "Shut up." And you can see, and here's another quote, but Jesus stops. And with no judgment, he starts a conversation. He talks to them. They can't see him, but they look in his direction, and they where his voice is coming from. He talks to them. He says, "What do you want?" And they say back to him, "We want to see." We don't know their stories, whether they're young or old, their parents living, they had wives, families, we don't know, but somehow Jesus connected with their pain. He touched them, they received their sight, they followed him. 4 stories, all compassion, compassion, compassion. So put it all together. What does Jesus expect from us? We're living in his kingdom, October 9, 2021, we're living in his kingdom. What does Jesus expect from us today? And that is, again, to live as he lived. To live as he lived. In Jesus' time, there were 4 main groups. This is interesting. In Jesus' time, there were 4 main groups that are very similar to what's going on in our societies today. You want me to tell you what those 4? You do. You want to hear about those 4 main groups. Do you take notes here at this church? 4 groups. Zealots. The zealots. The zealots are a group of people, and let me describe them to you. Always concerned about themselves. Warriors, violent, angry people, always worried about how people treated them. Right? They didn't like to be pushed around. They didn't like to be coerced. They were hyper concerned about their rights, and their daily life consisted of striking back to the people that believed different from them. Those were the zealots. And then, second group, Herodians. How do you understand that? It's the word Herod. They followed Herod. Herod was the king. Wasn't a Roman, he was kind of a Jew, but he was the king. And so King Herod, the people that followed King Herod were the Herodians, and they were mostly the wealthy Sadducees. And their great concern was their money, and that they hang on to their money. And they thought by following Herod, every point of direction that he gave, if they followed him, they could keep their power, they could keep their influence, they could keep their money. They were concerned about their money. Those were the Herodians. The third group was the Pharisees. And we know a lot about the Pharisees. So fussy, so particular, so legalistic. Daily they created rules and regulations, and they were obsessed with getting everyone to follow their rules and regulations. Those were the Pharisees. The last group was the Essenes, and the Essenes excelled in judgment. They just did that thing really good, judging. That's what the Essenes did. They thought everybody else was crazy. They thought everybody else was deluded, and they had to get away from all the people that believed different than them. They had to move away, and so they moved out of the town. They moved way down to the Dead Sea. They lived in communes far, far away from all society, totally isolated. They were the Essenes. In effect, Jesus said, don't be like any of those people. Don't be like a zealot. Don't be like a Herodian. Don't be like a Pharisee. Don't be like the Essenes, you're part of my kingdom. You are my representatives in my kingdom. And I call you to live out among the people, and you know the instructions that Jesus gave his disciples. Those are the same instructions he gives us today. Heal the sick, shelter the homeless, feed the hungry. Now, you guys do a good job of that, don't you? You feed the hungry here at Riverside Church. Feed the hungry. So, and it's as you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and I've read them over and over in the past few weeks, all you find is Jesus helping his disciples, building the character of his disciples, helping them to know how to live in his kingdom. And so it goes on, clothe the naked, visit the imprisoned, love your enemies, forgive your enemies, pray for your enemies, make peace with your enemies. In short, there's a lot of people out there in darkness, and you need to turn on the light. So that's what Jesus says to us today. Just turn on the light. There's people all around you in darkness. They're in your neighborhood. They're near where you work. They're at your school. They're in your church. They're all over the place. People in darkness, turn on the light. And the natural question is, okay, how can we relate to people that really makes a difference? There's a lady named Brené Brown, and this is a cartoon. You don't mind watching cartoons in this church, do you? This is a cartoon. Another word is animated. But Brené Brown tells us how we can really touch and impact and change people's lives.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Quite amazing. You can find it. Just go to YouTube and write Brené Brown empathy. It's there. You can watch it over and over again. It's something that speaks to our hearts. So what do we have? How do we treat people today as citizens of the kingdom, representatives in Jesus' kingdom? Perspective taking, staying out of judgment, recognizing emotions and saying, I'm with you in whatever you're going through. That's a lot for us to do, but it's four simple points. But I want to share with you as I close. That's exactly what happened in the life of Norval Young. It's exactly what happened in his life. And I want to take you back to the story that we started with. So Norval Young, chancellor of Pepperdine University, he does this thing. He gets drunk. He gets up in the morning. He blacks out. He's driving down Pacific Coast Highway. And if you've ever been down there, that highway goes all along the Pacific there. And right at the Getty Museum, there's a light. He doesn't see the light. He blacks out. He runs into this car. This car has a trailer hitch on the back of it. It punctures the gas tank, and that car burns up. His car begins to burn up. Someone that's walking by pulls him out, and he winds up in the hospital. And there's someone, and actually he wrote this. He said, the darkness descended there in the hospital. When I realized that I'd killed 2 people, I realized I'd shattered my own life plus the lives of thousands of people. I'm filled with despair, shame, desperation, remorse, and guilt. And he prays that he might die. And I don't know, I think probably if you would ask a group of people, a lot of people, have you ever thought about that? Praying that you die? Yeah, sometimes it gets so discouraged, we just can't see our way out. He couldn't see his way out. But then several things happened very rapidly, and this refers to exactly what Brené Brown said. And the first was, of course, his family came to his side. His wife was just miles away. He had daughters in L.A. He had a son in Houston. They all came to his side. But then, note this. It was a man named Dr. Paul Davis. He was the editor of Reader's Digest. He was a friend of his. He flew down from San Francisco. He got to the hospital. He visited his friend, and of course, Norval Young was going to survive. He was all banged up. He was going to survive. But he obviously he sat with his friend, and there's the physical pain of going through a horrible car accident. But he saw his friend's huge emotional pain and the guilt and all of the remorse. And he went to the hospital administrator. This is his friend, Dr. Paul Davis. He goes to the hospital administrator. He says, I've got money. I want to get into the hospital. He said, well, this is for sick people. You're not sick. He says, no, I will pay you. He paid the hospital. He got a room right next to his friend, Norval Young, and he sat there day after day by his bedside, holding his hand, touching him, listening to him, caressing him, hearing his story over and over and over again, and just continuing to listen, continuing to give compassion. And he did that throughout the convalescence of Norval Young. The second thing that happened was letters began to come in to the hospital. And they first a few, and then a flow, and then finally a flood of letters. And the letters, almost all of them said the same thing. The first thing was, this is horrible. 2 lives have been lost. It wasn't about Dr. Young. It was about these 2 ladies that had been innocently sitting in a car on Pacific Coast Highway. 2 lives have been lost. But then most of the letters went on to say, you must feel horrible. Because he was a kind man. He was a pastor. His whole life was lived for other people. And so the letters said, you must feel horrible. And then the letters went on to say, we're going to be with you. We are going to remain by your side. We are going to support you in this. And the long story made short is that you would assume Dr. Young would just vanish out of public life. And he had to resign as a chancellor of Pepperdine. He had to resign all his boards and committees, resign from all the magazines. He was an editor of magazines, Christian magazines. And he did. He went underground for a while. But steadily throughout his life, he came back. He began to talk about the accident. He began to talk about drinking. He began to write about it. And throughout his life, and he lived many, many years after this, throughout his life, he was able to help thousands and thousands of people with their addiction to alcohol. And so his life was changed, not in small measure by his friends. So we're going to end with a quotation, 2 short stories, and then there's a video that's just dynamite. It's entitled "Go Light Your World." That's what we'll end, and I won't even have to pray after that. That'll be how we end our time together. But 2 short stories. When I was about 27, I decided with a group of other young men, and you know, they say the male brain isn't formed till it's about 25. You've heard that. We decided we were going to run up Mount Whitney, and usually it's a 2-day hike. We said, well, we're going to do it in a day. So we left the trailhead early in the morning. We ran up Mount Whitney, 14,000 whatever feet high, and I couldn't do that today, but we did. We came back down, and we were so happy with ourselves. One day we were going to be bragging. Well, the sun went down. We were not back. We had no flashlight. Back again to darkness. And so it was horrible. 2 hours of wandering around. There's no moon, no stars, and wandering around trying to figure out, are we going to fall off a cliff? Will we ever get back? Are we going to die out here on Mount Whitney? And we obviously made it back. 2 hours in the darkness. And again, circling back, that was a stupid, dumb decision that we made that brought darkness on ourselves. And all around us are other people that are in darkness because of their own decision or because of whatever. What are we going to do for those people? How are we going to minister to those people? And this brings me to the last story, then the quote, then the song. The last story is about a man named Carlisle B. Haynes, Adventist evangelist from the 50s and the 40s and the 60s, long ministry. He wrote an article in the Review and Herald some time ago about his life as an evangelist. And he said, for years, I thought the big thing was attendance and baptism and preaching prophecy. And he said, I would go to these bookstores and I would search for prophecies, for unknown prophecies, mysterious prophecies that I could preach about. But then he said, I had a midlife epiphany. You know the word epiphany? Like suddenly you understand something. Aha moment. He said, I had a midlife epiphany. And in this epiphany, I realized, it's not about attendance. It's not about baptisms. And he said, and through his epiphany, he said, I still go to bookstores and I still search, but this time I'm not searching for mysterious prophecies, unknown prophecies. I'm searching to know more about Jesus. And it's all about Jesus. It's all about Jesus. It's all about Jesus. And as I said, in the last 3 months I've been reading Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You know, that's the core. That's Christianity. You read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and what is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke is what we are as Christians. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And it's all about being in the kingdom. The kingdom is right here, and it's right now. And it's 2 stages. We know that. There's this wonderful kingdom that's going to come, the trumpet and the voice of God and the resurrection and being with our eternal God forever. That's the second stage. But the first stage is right here and right now, and that is so, so important. Jesus came and he said to his disciples, you are going to be my representatives. You're going to be citizens of my kingdom. And because I've called you, this is how you act. And it is. It's all that we mentioned. It's clothing the naked and feeding the hungry and sheltering the homeless. It's all of that. Now the quote, and then the application, and then finally the video. And we'll conclude with the video. The quote is from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. And I don't know if you've heard that name. It's French. It's hard to pronounce. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He's the guy that wrote The Little Prince. And this is what he said. And stick with me. It's a little bit hard to understand where I'm going with this, but I understand it. This is what he said. He said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, if you want to build a ship, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. I'll read that again. This is Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, if you want to build a ship, teach them to yearn about the vast and endless sea. And what I'm saying is Jesus' ministry is so vast, and it's so endless, and it's so amazing, and it's so exciting. And the fact that we can participate in that ministry today, doing exactly what Jesus did, using our compassion, we can turn on the light.
There is a candle in every soul, some brightly burning, some dark and cold. There is a spirit who brings the fire, ignites a candle, and makes his home. Carry your candle, run to the darkness, seek out the hopeless, confused and torn. Hold out your candle for all to see it. Take your candle, go light your world. Take your candle, go light your world.
Frustrated brother, see how he tried to light his own candle some other way. See now your sister, she's been robbed and lied to, still holds a candle without a flame.
Carry your candle, run to the darkness, seek out the lonely, the tired and worn. Hold out your candle for all to see it. Take your candle, go light your world. Take your candle, go light your world.
We are a family whose hearts are blazing, so let's raise our candles and light up the sky.
Praying to our Father in the name of Jesus, make us a beacon in darkest time.
To the darkness, seek out the heavens, be sweet and bold.
Hold out your candle
For all to see it. Take your candle, go light your world. Take your candle, go
light your world.
take your candle, go light your world.